Hello, my name is Sharon Liu, and I am an executive in residence at JFF, Jobs for the Future. Thank you all for joining us on today's Open Skills Summit, and welcome to the Policy Implications for Equitable Skills panel. This is a very long name, but the focus of this session will be to think more broadly about skills-based practices, how to implement these practices, and how these can ultimately improve the transparency of our HR processes, reduce bias, and provide opportunity for economic advancement for all of the individuals in our workforce. Policy can have a lot of different definitions and meanings, ranging from national policy to state policy to regional practices to corporate and institutional activities. And hopefully our panel today will be able to help you see a broad range of all of these, as well as to walk away from this session thinking about how you might implement some of these practices at your organizations as well as in partnerships with others. What we're going to do is I will introduce all of our panelists and just a couple of things. So please feel free to type any questions you might have into the chat. We will be taking the questions throughout. And if you have any interest in answering our question of the day, introduce yourselves to us so we know who's in the audience. Let us know if you think you will be imminently replaced by a robot. So our three panelists today represent a very broad spectrum of experience and have a lot of great expertise to share. Amanda Winters is with the National Governors Association. Kristina Gunnarsdottir is from the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology, and Kevin Richards from SAP. So what I'll do is I'll just kick it off with a general question for all three of you first. So why engage in skills-based practices? Like, what outcomes does your organization or your organization's stakeholder hope to achieve by implementing these practices? Because ultimately it is a little bit of a trouble to do this. And I guess I'll start it off with you, Kevin. From your perspective, as a member of a very large commercial entity and a corporate experience, let us know why do this.
Sure. Thanks, Sharon, and thank you to the Open Skills Network and Western Governors University and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for inviting SAP to be part of this important conversation. We're certainly, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, the world's largest enterprise software company. We have 100,000 employees around the world and 480,000 customers that we help support the growth and the skills development of their workforces. And for us, really, what we see at SAP is the nature of employment is transforming rapidly. And obviously, as technologies advance and employment models change, it really is critical to find new ways to ensure that both American workers and businesses are empowered to match potential talent with commercial need. And at SAP, we have a focus on data transparency and accessibility. We believe that's a real integral part to this process. And we believe that, the work that the Open Skills Network is doing can help set the foundation to deliver the level of data required to answer core questions that persist in an ever-changing world of technical progress. A few of these questions that we have is, what skill demands from America's employers are not met by the labor supply? What are the major trends in skill demand? What are the drivers of change? And how does longevity, value, and growth, different skills vary by geography and industry? How viewable are different types of training to deliver the required skills to move one American into a position to take another role in a related space? And by skill category, I think really to answer these questions, both public and private sectors need more robust information, mapping skills to needs, job titles as a real mechanism to put Americans in control of improving their competitive position in the economy and their ability to securely share and combine existing data. And today, the data landscape does not really exist to the robust level that we need. So changing that reality is best achieved, we believe, by working with partners like the federal government, state and local governments, and with other commercial companies on commitments from the nation's largest employers and educational institutions and training providers to contribute new data constructs so we can solve some of these challenges together.
Thanks, Kevin. So I guess we'll pivot a little towards policy with a big P. Kristina, tell us a little bit about what motivates the federal government to participate in some of these projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think great to follow Kevin as he has already, spoken to the importance of responding to the accelerating rate of change and transformation in the economy. And I think as we're thinking about why skills-based practices are important to invest in, really anchoring the conversations we're having around education and workforce policy development in a conversation around skills is just increasingly important. Second is really thinking about how to build a more equitable economy. And so how do we foster those feedback loops between the education and workforce systems so that we can create that alignment around the skills that are not just needed to thrive as a worker and a citizen, but also those opportunities to continuously cultivate both, those skills that we know are important in the status quo and also those ones that are emerging. And then the final area that I think is important to mention is how to be responsive to the preferences and behaviors of our citizens. So one of the things that stood out in some surveys in 2020 and 2021, is we're seeing more than half of teenagers now believing that a quote skills-based education, though I think definitions are important here, was important, and that they can succeed in some type of post-secondary experience other than a 4-year degree. But at the same time, those same group of teenagers, are articulating a concern about not being prepared for a job after graduation, and not getting a job, and thinking around, where are those gaps in terms of perception of skills, and really feeling equipped to navigate that landscape. And in reports done among adult learners, we see, patterns that I think, illuminate the need for policymaking that is responsive in the same way. We saw in a 2021 report that 1 in 3 adult learners have changed or canceled their educational plans. And then among those disrupted learners, another 1 in 3 were actively pursuing enrollment in some type of education or training program. So I think the interest is there among different sectors of the population as well. And so at the department, we really recognize that the skilled workforce is critical for both strong communities but also a strong economy, and are really thinking about different targeted investments to build this capacity. So I'll just share an example from OET, the Office of Educational Technology. We've been investing in an exploration of verifiable digital credentials, which offer tremendous potential to unlock opportunities for skills-based social and economic mobility. And we've also started to explore the space of what a skill-based educational pathway might look like and the role that emerging technologies can play. So really just thinking about this through the lens also of realizing equitable opportunity, rather than just replicating status quo practices and calling them skills-based. So I think that's the area to be mindful of as we continue developing policy in this area.
Thanks, Kristina. So Amanda, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the states and what governors have been thinking about.
Yeah, so for the skills-based discussion, first of all, I'm so excited to be here and be part of this panel. I know I'm going to learn a lot, and hopefully can share some nuggets of interesting information with everyone who's attending today. But the skills are a language to speak across systems, or across state systems. So economic development, workforce, education, training, they're a way to connect and align investments and policy conversations across agencies. Because anybody who's working in the space knows we all speak a different language when we come to the table. So, but that skills is sort of it's a way in which we can get down to some of the nuts and bolts of the ways in which we can be interoperable together. And it also speaks to the goal rather than the vehicle for reaching it. So if we're talking about skills attainment, we're not necessarily talking about where the skill attainment happens. It could happen at an employer, or it could happen in an educational institution or a workforce training program. No matter where, we're looking at skills attainment. And so it sort of allows different players to see where they live in the space and the vision for a state in moving folks forward. And the thing that motivates governors, I feel like I can safely say this, is good jobs and economic mobility. I mean, that's family sustaining wage job, jobs of the future, jobs that allow families to buy homes, start businesses, save for retirement, build financial security for their families, improving opportunity and contributing to economic vibrancy. That's across the aisle priorities. I mean, every state. An example of some of the ways in which governors are really thinking about skills is our recently minted chair of the National Governors Association is Governor Hutchinson of Arkansas. And he's identified on his way into his chairmanship a focus on K-12 computer science education. So this is a strategy that he's focused in on in Arkansas that really exemplifies the way in which governors think across the pipeline around skill development. An example of the way in which they're trying to get those foundational skills built in to our system to allow people to access jobs of the future. And it really builds upon state investments in career pathways, education and workforce alignment, and certainly the COVID pandemic has highlighted the need for being nimble and being able to reskill to move into different spaces within the workforce. So again, that skill becomes the difference rather than just purely a credential. It's like, what do you need to move? And it really boils down to skills. So that's why you're seeing a lot of state momentum in a conversation around especially skills-based training that will hopefully then connect to skills-based hiring at the other end.
So Amanda, you said the phrase nuts and bolts a little earlier in your comments, and I'm curious, would you share with us a few examples of how some of these skills-based practices are being implemented at states? And definitely feel free to name names because this is definitely recorded. So I mean, as an example to others or to give people encouragement on types of projects that they could try to implement too.
Certainly. And yeah, skills-based implementation is super challenging because it doesn't just belong to one agency or sector, can't be fully addressed by the public sector or the private sector alone. As Kevin was mentioning, it's really sort of that public-private connection to move some of these things forward. It really requires an ecosystem, and some state systems are just better set up because of governance structures to be able to allow for that. Certainly, the language of skills is one that is a huge challenge, but also thinking about transferability and funding and data and supporting, the concept of lifelong learning, which is hard to get your arms around as well when thinking from a policy perspective. But we did see a really intriguing model come up over the last year or so, really forward-looking, that we've seen a lot of momentum around. And it's a small example, but I think it sort of exemplifies some of the work that's going on. And it's with Intel Corporation. And we started some work with the state of Arizona, and specifically partnering up with Maricopa colleges, community colleges, and focusing on how can they move forward and address their skills needs around AI and machine learning. So very relevant to the conversations that are having, your questions you asked before around, are we going to be replaced by robots? Hopefully not. Hopefully we'll, all have jobs where we figure out how to control the robots. But really it's an industry partner becoming part of a solution around skills development and needs, and a state stepping up saying, yeah, we are ready to put investment towards this. We're ready to put time towards this. We know we need to train our instructors. We know we need to develop new programs that are focused on these emerging skills. We know we constantly need to update our processes and systems to respond to the changing needs. As Kristina mentioned, things are so rapidly evolving. We don't have those things built in. Then the structures we put in place are going to be, outdated almost immediately. So this is really a back and forth between industry with the emerging needs and educator systems to think about how this ecosystem can live on and actually move people into positions that aren't just tech positions. These are occupations that require AI and machine learning across, healthcare and sales and tech and education. It's a broad swath. And so I think what we're seeing emerging is the close conversation between industry, education, and the state around economic development opportunities that exist with the expansion of a trained workforce. But then also sort of that continued conversation about these can't be stagnant skill sets that we're putting forward. What will we need to do in the future? What systems can we set up to make that happen? And I know that Intel collaboration is expanding across the country with states showing interest, especially during the pandemic, and thinking about how can we use this as a moment to think about future-focused skills. So only called out a couple names there, but just wanted to throw in an innovative example from our recent experience.
No, that's really great. And I like how you dragged the industry as a partner into your example. And I'm curious, Kevin, how does industry actually feel about being in these partnerships with the government?
Thanks. That's a great question. Well, we can't do it alone, and we know that government can't do it alone. So really, we believe that public-private partnerships are really essential, especially when we're looking at data points. We think it's unacceptable to have people unemployed while we have an IT shortage of 800,000 practitioners. And today, there's more than 200 million adults in the US that are part of the digital workforce, yet only 1 in 10 consider themselves very proficient with the digital skills that they use at work every day. Amanda is definitely speaking SAP's language. We're focused on digital skills, and our customers are focused on digital skills. And especially, representing the technology industry, it's a real driver of economic development in the United States, with 5.7 million people and a powerful engine for economic growth and competitive strength, driving $1 trillion into the American economy. The education and training system, we believe, has to be modernized to adapt to the digital economy and the knowledge-based economy, to really provide the highly skilled workforce necessary to sustain the tech sector. There'll be a need for 1.4 million jobs in computer science over the next 3 years. And at the pace we're going, we'll only have 400,000 people to fill those jobs. So when you look at the war on talent, we really have to do this in partnership with government. And SAP, for its own part, we've been working closely with local government as well. Amanda, we work close to Governor Holcomb in the state of Indiana, and served on the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board with the White House. Western Governors University was part of that. The U.S. Chamber is part of that. And really to equip innovators across HR and education, training, and recruiting spaces with the tools to develop novel techniques to answer and address some of the questions we're talking about today. We believe that policymakers should really create data transparency when it comes to skills and focus on 3 areas particularly. One is to support the development of a flexible skills-based ontology and structured and living taxonomies to create adaptable common data foundation on which to build, and also to establish portable, interoperable records of individual learning history, experience, and skills, to give individuals credible documentation of their existing skills, and to produce a granular view of the labor supply that includes job seekers and job holders. And also, finally, to develop a trusted system for sharing workforce data in the aggregate, such that currently, data exists very siloed. It can be leveraged across the ecosystem. It needs to be leveraged across the ecosystem by both public and private sectors, and also at the individual level between government agencies and jurisdictions to enable personalized citizen services and create effective resource collaboration. And we found in working with a lot of our state and local partners that they have challenges with data sharing and breaking down silos when it comes to skills and workforce skills data and getting that from the federal government. So we did a lot of work talking about templatized data sharing agreements to help expedite that process, so we can get our arms more around addressing the direct problems when it comes to skills and skills development.
Thank you, Kevin. So Kristina, it's perfect that you're next, because Kevin just gave you a whole list of things that he wants you to get right on. So tell me a little bit more about what your thoughts are on some of the to-do items that Kevin just listed and some other examples of what the government is doing in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I'll just start off by saying, I think as we discuss key issues and considerations, there's definitely an interesting and very important conversation to also be had about, what we mean when we say skill-based, who this language is directed towards, And I think most importantly, where and with whom these types of programs are designed and implemented. So not just thinking about, yes, it is workforce and education systems, but it is also the learner worker at the center, or who is experiencing those systems, and how do we really partner with those individuals and those communities to design these systems in ways that are really going to come from the need of the user. And at the department, what we've really been thinking about, to your point, Kevin, is how to weave these sort of practices through different agencies' work and really use it as a vehicle to foster more interagency collaboration, more collaboration, between federal entities and our partners across states and supporting agencies. And so just to share some examples of how we've started to do that, as we've worked on the COVID guidance, for example, we introduced a recommendation there related to our work on digitally verifiable credentials, which, as you mentioned, Kevin, this question of records and interoperable records is really key to moving this type of systemic change forward. And so sometimes I think it's about also broadening the question to say, yes, we can provide guidance on an immediate challenge that our nation and our world is facing, and can we use it as an opportunity to really think about broadly, how do we move forward and really foster innovation and opportunity as we are thinking about reskilling and upskilling. And also Dr. Cardona this June was speaking upon some policies and priorities of the Department of Education and some investments that have been made already in the current administration or are in the works. Just a few I want to highlight because I think they also speak to this opportunity for collaboration. So one of them are around career and technical education, national programs that really support youth in finding opportunities for work-based learning that would result in an industry credential. So speaking to that public-private partnership you were mentioning. Another was the adult education national leadership activities, college bridge programs. So supporting adults who have not completed their high school degree. Also thinking about expanded career pathway networks for underserved middle and high school students. This might include partnerships that would allow for dual credit, so graduating from high school at the same time as earning credit towards an associate's degree. And then finally, programs that support job-seeking adults, not just with career services, but also the types of programs that would help develop foundational skills or skills in emerging areas of interest in terms of career progression. On a different scale, I guess you could say, we're also seeing various initiatives to shift policy on skills-based practices through legislation. So just a couple that I'll call your attention to. In January 2021, the Skills Renewal Act was introduced, which is a co-sponsored bill, and that explores a refundable tax credit for qualified training services for individuals who are unemployed in 2020. And so that has a particular focus on areas that are sort of pre-certified as high need by the Department of Labor. So they're calling out computer science and technology in particular. Then just a month later, we have the Skills Investment Act, which was also co-sponsored. And this explores another mechanism, which would be expanding the Coverdell education savings accounts. So these are currently used to support the tuition and tuition-related expenditures of dependents. But the vision is for this to, become a lifelong learning account, and thus could be used for training, CTE, career services, adult education, literacy programs, as well as, expanding the eligibility, criteria for being able to invest in one of these accounts. And then you also have, initiatives like the Federal Skills Act, which was, coming out of an executive order that was introduced in 2020. And that was really focusing on the educational requirements for federal jobs, and in particular seeks to identify alternative assessment practices to determine, an applicant's knowledge, skills, competencies, and abilities. initiatives. So, when I'm thinking about these together, not just in terms of initiatives and investments already made, but also these possible legislative changes, I think about, again, yes, it is about education and workforce, but most importantly, it's about the learner worker. And so how do we, make sure that as we develop policy around these issues, it's in a way that is not politicizing the person at the center who, stands to experience transformation through these policies. And then I think there are some more practical considerations that are always on my mind as key issues in policy development that relate to quality assurance, making sure that the assessments of these programs as they proliferate, as well as their outcomes, are transparent. That's also related to, how do we support access to information about these types of programs, navigability of such a wide breadth of opportunity. And then, of course, the question of, assessing the skills themselves and doing that in a way that respects the autonomy of state and individual entities in the public and private sector, but also ensuring we have some baselines and some frameworks to facilitate interoperability as someone moves through their journey.
Wow, that's kind of a long list. So I'm going to ask a quick follow-up question, which may or may not be quick, but I'm curious, so for those people who are interested in sort of following the progress of some of these bills and legislation or these programs, or even thinking oh, I am really interested in X because, this is right in line with what my organization wants to do, how would they follow the progress of some of these?
Yeah, so Congress.gov is where I've been doing a lot of my research. And I will just say, as a newcomer to the federal government, it's been a really incredible resource to not just see quick at a glance, when a bill was introduced, what stage in the process it's at, but also, is it a co-sponsored bill, who the co-sponsors are, they have a short summary. So I found that to be a really accessible resource, even if you're novice to the space.
Thanks. So Kevin, there was a question in the chat about your list of 3 homework assignments for the federal government. Would you mind repeating that list?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Let me just pull up my notes here. So in terms of a skills-based ontology, really work is to have a common lexicon when it comes to that. And really, I think that's been an intensive effort. So we've been partnering and been part of the effort at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce with the T3 initiative that is bringing partners together in the HR space and education and training and recruiting processes to really focus on developing a more flexible and skills-based ontology that's structured and is a living taxonomy to create adaptable common data foundation upon to which to build. The other area was establishing a portable interoperable record of individuals' learning history, experience, and skills. I think a lot of folks today develop skills on the job, but that you don't necessarily earn a certificate or a credential, but that is skills. You're learning from maybe a shop steward has 40 years experience, and a digital would really help bring those skills to light and with an interoperable learning record. And that goes to the point, I think, what we were talking about earlier about really focusing on the individual to produce a granular view of the labor supply. And so with job seekers themselves and job holders, and also to develop a trust system for sharing workforce data. Currently, data assets are very siloed, both in the federal government, within the state and local government, and with the private sector. So really aggregating that data between public and private entities, and at the individual level between governmental agencies and jurisdictions to able to personalize citizen services to really create more effective resource allocation. And I'm happy to share that with the group. And Sharon, I can send it to you if you'd like to share with others. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so we're at about 10 minutes out. So this is a reminder that if you join the chat, you can type in a question for any of our panelists or all of them, and we'll add them to the queue. But Amanda, you had mentioned ruling the robots earlier, and I'm curious, like, if you can elaborate on that. So do you really, as we start transitioning, or if we do transition to more skills-based practices, how do we actually reduce discrimination and provide pathways and opportunities, especially for traditionally marginalized populations?
Yeah, and that's a really challenging question. I was struck recently by a tweet from a colleague, Dr. Alex Calmerdell from the Joint Center, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but we should consider the implications for skills-based hiring on job seekers of color. So with skill assessments or validations, there's a danger of them becoming the alternative to traditional credentials and degrees. So how do we avoid exacerbating the inequity as we consider these shifts? I'm so grateful that he put that thought out there, because there's a tendency to think that skills-based training and hiring will level the playing field, and I think it can. It can go a long way in doing that. But he's right. We have to be attentive to the policies that are being developed at the state level and then being implemented at the employer level. They're not the silver bullet for racial equity and inequity, changing inequities in training and hiring, but they can be a strong strategy if they're implemented with intentionality. But as far as racial equity goes and really closing some of those gaps, that's a commitment that's larger than just a change in credential requirements or the way in which we're talking about skills and credential attainment. It remains a strong call to action, I think, for both states and employers as we're thinking about the future workforce. So I do think there's a danger that we'll get stuck in the middle, where traditional credentials are still utilized as that proxy for skill attainment, and other things remain the alternative. So I think if we really want to see this strategy be able to address issues of inequity, we need to make, the shift has to be wholesale, and it can't be just a partial conversation around alternative pathways, because then that allows the opportunity for inequity to remain in the systems, when that's exactly what we're trying to get at. We're trying to get at access, opportunity, and understanding of where learning can happen and how to capture it and allow learners to have the agency to take that skill attainment and get better opportunity. And if it still ends up relegating folks to the lesser opportunities, then we haven't realized the potential that exists here. But again, going back to the earlier conversations, it's a public and private responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of the education world to move more skills-based if the employers are not going to take that and then use that to onboard folks into their workforces that really have this diverse sort of pathways to skill attainment. So I think right now we're still very aspirational around what this skills-based conversation could do to change our workforces. And it's something that I think we'll see differing levels of execution and outcomes from as we're making a transition. Hopefully we continue with it and can really move in a positive direction. But I think the stops and starts are inevitable in this work. And state policy doesn't move quickly. And federal government doesn't move quickly either. So, we're right there with you. But thinking about what can we do to make sure we're very intentional as all of us are having these conversations and the Open Skills Network is having these conversations, how can we make sure that we avoid some of these pitfalls around tracking or alternative being, alternative to what then becomes pathways for the more privileged, and then pathways for the underserved that will not get us to the same places at the end. So yeah, you've kind of outlined what one of the biggest challenges is making sure that we can actually attain the things that we're all talking about as being our desired outcomes, which is really that more equitable and inclusive and diverse workforce.
I think that that's an excellent way of explaining it. And actually, not to put you on the spot, Kevin, but maybe in addition to providing some reflections, maybe some words of advice for others who are in industry, just as they start thinking about implementing skills-based, how to avoid the dual track and how to actually keep the non-discrimination at the center.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sharon. And I'll take a little opportunity here to talk about our partnerships and what we do to reach out to underrepresented communities. What we have, what I regard as a model program, it's called SAP's University Alliance Program, and it exposes students and faculty to the latest technologies and enables universities and vocational schools to integrate SAP software design techniques into their curriculum and teaching. Right now, SAP partners with 3,000 colleges and universities globally, about 500 here in the US. And the program really exposes students and teachers to the SAP technologies to enable those vocational schools to integrate software into their technology skills program. And we also have a program that is out of that University Alliance program called Project Propel, which focuses this concept on historically Black colleges, universities, and minority serving institutions to really address the problem of underrepresentation of African Americans and other minorities in the tech industry. And SAP also sponsors info jams, code jams, hackathons to expose K through 12 students to coding and building really the next generation of apps. I think to answer the question on AI, and jobs, people are going to be in jobs, but they're just going to change a little bit. So we have a big focus too on soft skills, skills that computers can't do, like empathy, and focus on that as a company. And many of our customers are focusing on that as well. And as all of our customers in the Fortune 2000 and governments around the world use our software to run their back office and their training abilities. So when we hear from our customers, they're focused on those skills of the future, whether it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, cloud, and we really see these trends coming together. But we really need a flexible workforce and one that's one of continuous learners that learns new skills and upskills every 3 years or so. Unlike the jobs of yesterday, where maybe our parents were in a career at the same company for 30 years, people are going to switch between companies and switch between industries. So having those soft skills and those flexible skills are important. But the U.S. population really needs to be equipped with the digital skills of tomorrow. And SAP is doing this. A lot of our colleagues in the tech industry and our peers are doing this. But I hope that highlights some of the partnerships that are necessary with working across the community to get some of these initiatives across the finish line.
Thanks. So Kristina, any final words? We're down to the last couple of minutes here.
Yes, absolutely. So I just jotted down some thoughts in response to your question that you posed to Amanda. And I apologize. I think there's a lawnmower about to pass by my window, but if you can hear me all right. I think a foundational element of this is acknowledging and understand and taking time to understand how discrimination and bias and exclusion occurs in the status quo. Bias exists in algorithms because it exists in the data that we train these algorithms on. And the more we're willing to not just have those conversations, but really do the research to understand, how that perpetuates when we continue to use those same systems is really essential. Second, I think partnering with learner workers directly, as well as the organizations that work most closely with the communities where those particular learner workers reside and work, and then really thinking about tailoring solutions as locally as possible and then scaling out is really important. And then third, not relying on the same companies and organizations that have dominated, the assessment space for, close to a century. I think it's really important that we continue to explore and innovate and partner with these organizations, but also make sure we are continuing to create space for new technologies and new approaches to emerge, and ideally emerge from the learner workers that will be most impacted.
Thank you. So thank you all for joining us. We are at time. It's 2:55, and I want to release you back to the main session. Thank you for joining us. If you have any other questions, I see that there was a request for some of the ILR papers that you mentioned, Kevin, and I'm sure that we can speak with our organizers about distributing some additional information. Please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have follow-up questions about the examples that were shared. And thank you again for joining us, and thank you to the panelists for your expertise.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much.
Thanks.
Take good care. Thank you, Sharon.